erleichtert die Vorschläge, sodass sie auch in den Basic. Tempo giocoso.
Our future lies in art, especially music. In times when spiritual goods are rarer than material ones, and egoism, envy, and hatred govern the world, music will do much to re-establish love among mankind.
On the 14th of June, 1949, Richard Strauss's 85th birthday was celebrated with the production of Der Rosenkavalier. At the rostrum, a young Hungarian conductor, Georg Scholti.
You can imagine the palpitation which I had when he arrived to the dress rehearsal, and I took him down to the orchestra pit and introduced him his old orchestra, which partly, of course, was the same people whom we worked so much. It was a very moving, the whole orchestra stood up, and it was a very moving experience. And then, as he arrived to the desk, I stood beside of him. He said to me, "Where are the horns?" I said, "There, Dr. Strauss." Trumpet. He said, I can't see anything anymore. I can't hear also very well, but I trust I know it well. He then conducted a very little piece of the end of the second act with Georg Juan sang his first Ox.
Meine Herren, wir fangen an, Ziffer 253.
Three months after this memorable Rosenkavalier rehearsal, Strauss died, and Germany mourned one of its most important opera composers, the greatest since Richard Wagner.
Dr. Richard Strauss lebt nicht mehr. Sein Geist, sein Genius, seine Musik wird Jahrhunderte überleben.
I played in his funeral music, and it was one of the most moving musical experience of my life. Not what I did, but because how it happened. One of his wish was in the testament that the Rosenkavalier Tercet will be sung and played. One by one, the three singers broke down. Not on the same time, but they began to cry. And again, we finished together, we came back slowly, and I went on playing with the orchestra, the tercet, without a point, without singing at all. And Pauline was there, the famous Pauline, who was until that point the strength itself, totally broken, crying and broken. And I think very soon, a few months later, she was dead also. Couldn't live without Richard.
On the 20th of June 1864, Franz Strauss, first horn player at the Munich Court Orchestra, wrote to his father-in-law,
"My heart swells with a father's joy as I do myself the honor of informing you that at 6 o'clock this morning my dear good little wife bestowed on me the happiness of a boy, healthy and as round as a ball. At the same time, it gives me the greatest pleasure to tell you that mother and son are both very well."
It was the first year of the reign of King Ludwig of Bavaria, that enlightened monarch who did so much for art and to whose generosity the world owes much of the music of Richard Wagner. Munich, the capital of the Bavarian kingdom, was a sleepy town of 150,000 inhabitants. It had a large middle-class population, and the arts played an important part. For Germans, listening to music produced not only moral but also patriotic values. Richard Strauss was born into a comfortable home. His mother, Josephine Pschorr, came from a wealthy brewer's family. Later, Strauss recalled in his diary,
According to my mother, as a baby I reacted to the sound of a horn with a smile, and to the sound of a violin with crying. At the age of 4, I had my first piano lessons from a friend of my father who played the harp in the Munich Court Orchestra. At 6, I undertook my first composition, A Christmas Carol. I drew the notes, but my mother had to write the text. I also composed the Schneider polka.
Richard was the first of 2 children. Their holidays were spent in the countryside round Munich, with its mountains, lakes, and the fairy tale castles of the king. His sister remembered,
"A love of nature was born in Richard on those holidays, which remained with him for the rest of his life. He had a great love for everything, meadows and forests, mountains and lakes."
Even on holiday, young Richard never forgot to practice the piano.
At the moment, I'm very diligently playing the Mozart piano concertos. It's giving me enormous enjoyment. What abundance of ideas, what harmonic richness, and yet what sense of proportion.
Every Sunday there was a family concert at Uncle Georg's house. Richard played the piano or the violin. Of course, there were always his own compositions, and Aunt Johanna sang the lieder he had dedicated to her. But the high point of those festivities which united the large family was always the serving of sausages and beer.
Throughout their life, the relationship between father and son was marked by love and respect. Richard later recalled in his diary,
Under the strong guidance of my father, I grew up entirely in the tradition of classical music. His musical creed was the trinity of Mozart, Haydn and Beethoven, followed by Schubert and Weber, and long after that, Mendelssohn and Spohr.
In school, Richard learned the standard works of classical German education, Goethe, Schiller, and Shakespeare.
Despite the fact that he has also distinguished himself with his musical pursuits, he has nevertheless worked hard at his language studies, with good results, and has displayed a mature understanding in the exposition of the classics.
Regular visits to the museums gave him a thorough knowledge of art, which was to remain with him to the end of his life.
There can be few pupils in whom a sense of duty, talent, and liveliness are united to the degree that they are in this boy. He attends closely in class, nothing escapes him. And yet he is incapable of sitting still for a moment. He finds a bench a very tiresome object.
His exercise books were full of compositions, and Richard was still attending school when one of his own works was performed by an amateur orchestra conducted by his father. And there was much applause when the young composer took his bow.
A gavotte on the program was marked as the first performance and was given a favorable reception. After repeated calls, the president of the association led the composer onto the platform. It was the 14-year-old son of the conductor, Herr Strauss. He will at all events bring honor to the family name.
Like all Germans from the upper middle classes, Richard was sent on the grand tour. He set out on his educational trips to Vienna and Berlin.
Vienna, April 1882. Dearest Papa, already I know the whole town from the outside, but have not yet visited anything except the theatre. Saturday, Tannhäuser, not as good as in Munich. Sunday, Romeo and Juliet, ticket 4 gulden, marvelous. Sunday morning, concert with serenade for orchestra by Brahms, very beautiful. Only the adagio is weak. Can you imagine? There were even some booze. Tomorrow, another concert. Love to the whole family. Your economic son, Richard.
My dear son, it gives me great pleasure to hear that you are moving in such good social circles. It will be of extraordinary benefit to you in your general development. Nothing gives such refinement to the mind and sensibility as association with cultivated men and women. What is an artist without a refined mind and warm sensibility? Don't give offense. Your tongue is liable to run away with you. So think before you speak.
The young Richard realized that a German composer had to have a symphony to his credit to call himself a composer. From Berlin, the bustling town of Kaiser Wilhelm, the undisputed center of German cultural and social life, he wrote to a friend,
I'm having a royal time here. I've survived a performance of Valkyrie and seen a new opera by Massenet, which is very charming in places, especially in the ballet music, but doesn't amount to anything. It has a rotten text. In spite of never getting up before 11 and spending every evening in society, or at the theatre, or a concert, and paying calls most days, or writing letters, I have not been idle. I have written my F minor symphony and met Hans von Bülow, who is taking my Serenade for Brass for his touring program.
Von Bülow was one of the leading conductors in Germany. In 1884, he invited the young composer to make his conducting debut with one of his own compositions. Strauss's father played in the orchestra.
Mother and I both felt as if a stone had been lifted from our hearts, and my father may never have breathed such a sigh of relief after a concert as he did after this one. What it meant to him to be playing in the orchestra in the first performance of a large-scale work by his own son. In spite of his triumph, we did not have any great celebration at home. My parents wisely restrained themselves in praising him.
Soon afterwards, Bülow asked Strauss to join him in Meiningen, a small but powerful cultural centre which possessed one of the best modern orchestras in Europe. On the 21st birthday of the young composer, Bülow wrote to the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen,
May I engage Herrn Richard Strauss for the next season? He is happy with a salary of 1,500 marks. What title shall he have? Ducal concert director or music director? Kapellmeister has rather fallen into disrepute.
His Highness bestowed on Richard the title Hofmusikdirektor and a salary of 1,500 marks. Strauss's apprenticeship with Bülow consisted of rehearsing with the orchestra, looking after the ladies' choir, and giving piano lessons to Princess Mary.
Yesterday I conducted my F minor symphony. Among the audience was none other than Johannes Brahms. I was eager to hear his judgment. In his taciturn way, he said, "Quite nice." And he added some worthwhile advice. "Young man, take a good look at Schubert's dances and try a hand at inventing simple 8-bar melodies."
His father, delighted with Brahms's advice, added his own counsel on conducting.
It is ugly to make those serpentine gestures, especially for a beanpole like you. It's already not pleasant to look at von Bülow, and his is a small, graceful figure. Please, my dear Richard, follow my advice and get rid of these silly habits.
By the age of 26, Strauss was a successful conductor working all over Germany. In 1892, he fell ill with pleurisy, and in order to cure his lungs, he went on a 9-month trip to Egypt and Greece. It was during his journey that the idea grew for a tone poem, Tod und Verklärung, Death and Transfiguration.
My trips to Greece were decisive for my whole relationship with the Greek cultural world. These are impressions which will shape my whole life. How marvelous Greece is with its lonely mountains, its marvelous blue sea and sky. And how deeply I feel that each art form can only be totally understood on the ground which brought it forth. Uplifted by the heavenly, divinely inspired peace of this hallowed spot, I praise the good spirit which has led me hither. What harmony of nature and art! The greatest contrast to our Christian German world, which gave us the music of the 19th century. Bayreuth, Olympia. Here, great geniuses create from their own innermost strength the loftiest monument yet erected in the cultural development of all races.
In 1894, Strauss married Pauline de Ahna, the daughter of a well-to-do noble family. Strauss was a frequent guest in Markgrafstein, where the de Ahnas had a country house. Pauline was a singer, and Strauss became her teacher. The relationship between pupil and tutor was not always easy.
Most respected Fräulein, by all appearances you are now so set on going your own way that my presence and the influence it inevitably exercises can only seem a burden to you. I regret, therefore, that I must gratefully decline your kind invitation, both today and in the future. Yours respectfully, Richard Strauss.
Father Franz, worried as usual about his son, wrote,
Dear Richard, please me and put things straight again. Fräulein de Ahna seems to be rather given to overexcitement, and a man of good breeding can always allow some latitude to a lady of that kind without lowering himself. Also, I am sure she is the singer who will come closest to interpreting your own music.
Peace was restored, and Pauline and Richard were married. The ceremony was celebrated in the little chapel behind the house. As a wedding present, Strauss gave his bride a cycle of Lieder, among them Mourning and Secret Invitation.
Dann verlasse der lauten Genossen fest freudiges Bild und wandle hinaus in den Garten zum Rosenstrauch. Dort will ich dich dann erwarten nach altem Brauch. An die Brust dir sinken, Genus gehofft, und deine Küsse trinken, wie ehemals oft.
The marriage was to survive many storms until the end of Strauss's life. Strauss had arrived artistically and socially. He was a promising composer and a successful conductor. Like many composers before him, Beethoven, Mendelssohn and Gluck, he began to write large orchestral pieces taking their themes from saga and history. Strauss was eager to conduct his own work.
Even die Vorstellung, zoals hou je de basic. Tempo giocoso. 9 takten nach P.
Yesterday, I had my first rehearsal of Don Juan. I felt sorry for the poor trumpeters and horn players. They were all so blue, the piece is so difficult. But the sound was wonderful, glowingly rich. Afterwards, a horn player, out of breath and covered in sweat, said, "My God, what have we done to deserve such punishment?"
Strauss took his tone poems all over Europe, as far as Moscow. In Amsterdam, after Death and Transfiguration, the audience rose to its feet, and his name was added in golden letters to those of Wagner and Liszt, obliterating that of poor Bülow. Strauss enjoyed success all his life.
He enjoyed it, but he took it for granted, really, because he knew who he was. He was not conceited, that he was not at all, but he knew his force. He knew that he was somebody. No?
Erfolg war eigentlich für ihn selbstverständlich. Er hat schon in so jungen Jahren Erfolg gehabt, dass er das hingenommen hat als ein Tribut für seinen Fleiß.
Er musste ja sich herum fühlen, dass er eigentlich, wenn er das auch nicht so ausgesprochen hat, aber was doch die Welt empfunden hat, einer der letzten großen und international wirkenden Komponisten war. Denn tatsächlich hat kein anderer dieses, wie soll ich sagen, diese weite Ausstrahlung gehabt.
The tone poem established him as the most talked about composer in Europe, and there was much praise from his fellow artists. Debussy wrote,
"Richard Strauss is almost the only original musician in Germany. His music is the sun."
And the old Bruckner, sitting tired and ill in his armchair, was so enthralled by Till Eulenspiegel that he returned the next day to hear the work again. Concert tours confirmed his position as one of Europe's leading conductors. During the next 40 years, Strauss was to conduct all over the world.
Remember that you are making music to delight your audience, not to please yourself. You should not perspire when conducting. Only the audience should get warm. Conduct Salome and Elektra as if they were by Mendelssohn. Fairy music. Never look encouragingly at the brass, except with a short glance to give an important cue. Never let the horns or the woodwind out of your sight. If you can hear them, they are too strong. The audience must be able to follow every word the soloist sings. Otherwise, they will go to sleep. When you think you have reached the limits of prestissimo, double the pace. If you follow these rules carefully, you will always be the darling of your audience.
You see, I learned one very special thing. He had a beat, which, in contrary of most conductors, always when they come to the upbeat, they make boo. He was always, it was going on. He had an impeccable sense of rhythm. Not rhythm like a military march, of the inner rhythm which is in a piece, and which, if it just fails to do this, it gets boring. It was always something going on, and that was a wonderful way for conducting Mozart. And that was one of the real things. And he, I think, it was his purest style of Mozart conducting.
Strauss war ein richtiger Dirigent. Und zwar einer von höchsten Graden. Und dann muss ich sagen, seine Mozart, also wenn ich so an Così fan tutte denke, da waren wir, glaube ich, gerade. Das war unbeschreiblich. Wirklich.
He didn't move his hands, große Bewegung,
large movements.
Large with his hands, very small, and if he wants a crescendo, his arms don't move larger, but his face was getting red and always more red. So we know he wants a crescendo.
He was a marvelous conductor. My first impression was a Tristan in the opera house here in Vienna. I was on the galleries, and it was so marvelous because the second act, he made it so very, very exciting, you know, and more or less quick, because it's also right, I have the feeling.
Once I was doing a new production of Tannhäuser, and when I started the ouverture. No, it was the Bacchanal. He was sitting behind, and suddenly I asked him, would he not come and conduct, because I wanted to hear acoustic everything. And very graciously said, well, he came in, I gave him the music. And from the moment on, the orchestra was changed. You can't see not for the better or worse. It was complete in his stature. In everything it was changed.
Wenn man als Musiker, so wie ich, Jahrzehnte im Orchester sitzt, weiß man, dass Orchestermusiker nur zu leicht kritisieren. Und da gibt es zwei Menschen in meinem Leben, über die nie kritisiert wurde. Das war auf der einen Seite Richard Strauss und auf der anderen Seite Furtwängler. Wir standen unter dem Eindruck, den größten lebenden Musiker vor uns zu haben. Und ich muss sagen, da übertreibe ich nicht. Es war jedes Mal ein Fest für uns, wenn er vor uns stand. Und es gab weder eine Undiszipliniertheit noch eine Unaufmerksamkeit.
Und das ist ein Taktstock von Richard Strauss, den ich mal im Künstlerzimmer im Odeon mitgehen habe lassen. Er war sicher nicht mehr gebraucht, denn er ist schon abgebrochen, aber er ist typisch für den Dirigenten Strauss, der ihn eben so in der Hand leicht gehabt hat und keine Kraftanstrengung vollbracht hat. Dagegen der hier ist von Gustav Mahler, den habe ich geschenkt bekommen, auch abgebrochen. Und der verlangt natürlich eine ganz andere Hand.
By the turn of the century, the composer of chamber music, lieder, and program symphonies was established. Strauss was now to change again, to become what he was best known for throughout the world, an opera composer. Composing opera would overshadow all his other activities, and in 1890 he had already begun work on his first opera, Guntram. Pauline sang Freihilde at the premiere in Weimar. The opera was not a success, and in Munich it saw only one performance. Strauss always considered it a child of sorrow, a failure which wounded him deeply. In 1904, Strauss and Pauline set out for their first trip to the United States. The tour lasted 4 weeks, during which Strauss and Pauline gave numerous concerts and recitals. They were even received by President Roosevelt. The New York Times wrote,
"He is a young man of unpretentious appearance, slim and loose-jointed, as he threads his way among the orchestra to the front of the platform. He evidently carries the substance of his music easily in his head, for he made only casual references to the printed pages before him. In fact, a conductor who exhibits so little of the spectacular and so much concentration in his work has not lately been seen here."
New York, 1904. Dearest parents, in 4 weeks, 21 concerts with 20 different orchestras traveling day and night. My first concert in Carnegie Hall, a giant auditorium for 4,000 people, Zarathustra and Heldenleben, for which I took 6 bows. We are cheerful, but we have to change our wardrobe too often. Monday, orchestra concert in Brooklyn, Eulenspiegel, Death and Transfiguration. Pauline sang 6 lieder, 3 encores. She received a flower arrangement which was so heavy that even I couldn't carry it off. Roses with stems 1 meter long costing 100 marks. We had to leave them. Pity, today they had wilted. We hired an electrical automobile. It cost 40 marks. We drove through the wild, miserably paved New York and crossed the fantastic Hudson Bridge. Houses 20 floors high are beautiful and gigantic even to my eye. In the newspapers, constant interviews quoting things I have never said. Pauline eats oysters every day. They are marvelously fresh here, and 8 cost only 1 mark.
He received the princely sum of $1,000 to conduct in the department store of Wanamaker's. Scorned by the German press for commercialism, Strauss simply replied,
"Art ennobles any hall, and to earn money for my family is no disgrace."
Back in Europe, Strauss presented his second opera, Feuersnote. Note. It established his reputation as a serious composer of opera.
Ihr wolltet den langsamen Schritt euch bewahren, damit den Pfäfflein unterhalten Weiben nicht etwa der Schnauz.
In this ironical homage to Richard Wagner, the Philistine burghers are scolded for having chased Wagner away and are warned of the arrival of a new composer called Strauss.
Da trieb ihr den Wagner aus dem Tor, den bösen Feind, den triebt ihr nicht aus. Stellt sich euch immer aufs Neue zum Strauß.
Feuersnote Note was only a modest success. Modern audiences no longer cared for historical subjects. Spurred on by the interest in psychology, public taste had changed. When Strauss saw Oscar Wilde's Salome in the theatre, he immediately began to set the text to music. With Salome, an important step in the history of opera was made. The libretto was no longer a banal pretext for music. It was to reach, with Strauss, unknown heights, opening the way to a new genre, the literary opera. The difficult work took 2 years to complete, and on the 9th of December, 1905, the historic premiere took place in Dresden.
Yesterday, in front of the European elite of artistic, interested spectators, Strauss's Wild Salome was staged with breathtaking excitement, an indescribable success for the brave Dresden Opera and all the artists, headed by Strauss, who took 40 curtain calls.
Hildegard Ranschak was one of the great prima donnas of the German opera stage. She sang many times under Richard Strauss's baton, a long-standing relationship which began when she sang Salome in 1925.
You have to be very, how do you say in English, musikalisch.
Very musical.
Yeah. You have to be musikalisch, because otherwise you can't, you can't sing Strauss so well as I did. You see, when I came out, I sang, es ist seltsam, dass der Mann meiner Mutter mich so ansieht. Klopft ab. Once more, The same once more. I thought to myself, I sang it really all right. I didn't make no mistakes, nicht wahr? But I didn't say anything because I didn't know him. And so I sang it once more. He said, Ranzackel, die Töne stimmen nicht. And I said, ja, ich weiß, Herr Doktor. Aber wenn einem da der Kopf abgeschlagen wird, dann kann man nicht schön singen. He looked at me and said to the orchestra, eigentlich hat sie ja recht. Isn't that nice?
Salome was a succès de scandale. In Vienna, Mahler was not allowed to perform the opera. In New York, the work was stopped after a turbulent opening night, while in Berlin, permission was given on the condition that the star at Bethlehem would twinkle on the backcloth. In London, Thomas Beecham fought hard with the Prime Minister.
I explained to him the nature of the contretemps over Salome. Strauss was the most famous, and in common opinion, the greatest of living composers. This was his most popular work. It was to be played for the first time to a few thousand enthusiasts who wanted to hear it. I could not envisage the moral foundation of the empire endangered by a handful of operatic performances. Otherwise, we might run the risk of making ourselves slightly ridiculous in the eyes of the rest of the world, as we had so often done in the past.
As usual, Strauss's contemporaries rallied to his defense.
The elementary force of this genius and the burning hot wind of Salome, which hurls the soul around like dry leaves, has knocked me overboard,
wrote the young Ravel. But the praise which pleased Strauss most of all came from his friend Gustav Mahler.
It is a brilliant, very strong work, which definitely belongs to the most important things our time has produced. Fire, not just fireworks. My impression has been strengthened. Salome is one of the great masterworks of our time.
The final verdict came from Kaiser Wilhelm himself, who remarked,
I'm sorry that Strauss has composed Salome. I usually like him, but with this he will damage his reputation.
Strauss's simple answer was,
from this damage I could build myself a villa in Garmisch.
Garmisch was then a small village, 1.5 hours' drive from Munich in the middle of the mountains. Strauss always remained a true citizen of his native Bavaria and spoke with a strong Bavarian accent. Pauline filled the house with antiques, turning it into a kind of personal museum. Strauss was very much a family man. The love and sympathy which had marked his relationship with his parents, he now passed on to his wife and their only son, Franz.
Here I am the happiest, thanks to my wife, who was a true companion in spirit, and my lovely boy. I have found the quiet peace I long for and need. It is here I prefer to work, and composing seems the easiest. I write in my study and work without any trouble, sometimes up to 12 hours a day. I sit in my smoking jacket or in my English tweed suit at a desk which looks like any other desk. I am never feverishly excited. One has to be master of oneself if one wants to keep the constant movements of the orchestration in order. the head which composed Tristan must have been as cold as marble. I work slowly. The greatest art in invention is the art of being able to wait.
Er blättert auch um.
Ja, er blättert immer um. Er hat das auswendig dirigieren gehasst.
The Garmisch house is still as it was in Strauss's own day, a private home. Letters, photographs and home movies are kept as part of the family treasures, usually shown only to friends of the composer. The family is now presided over by Franz's widow, Alice, the daughter of a Jewish merchant from Vienna. She worked as the composer's personal secretary for 40 years. Alice Strauss is the uncrowned head of a family which consists of Strauss's two grandsons, Christian and Richard, their wives, and numerous great-grandchildren. None of them has become a musician, but all are fully aware that, like the Wagner family in Bayreuth, they are the guardians of a great name and a great tradition.
Wir haben 1924 geheiratet und von da ab war ich dann die Schreibkraft für meinen Schwiegervater. Und dadurch hatte ich das Glück, 25 Jahre seine Sekretärin zu sein. Das Leben von meinem Schwiegervater ist sehr regelmäßig verlaufen. Um ca. 9 Uhr ist er heruntergegangen an seinen Schreibtisch, hat dann geschrieben und regelmäßig eine Stunde spazieren gegangen. Mittagessen um 1, eine kurze Ruhe und dann wieder am Schreibtisch. Dann kam noch einmal ein kurzer Spaziergang und dann war er wieder am Schreibtisch, meistens bis 10, 11 Uhr. Er hat oft gesagt, Abend, wenn er nicht mehr weiter gewusst hat, ist er schlafen gegangen und früh war die Melodie da.
Melody is the absolute revelation of the deepest secrets. It comes to me directly from the ether. But then it is important to wait for the precise moment in which the imagination allows one to make use of it. Musical ideas have to be laid down like young wine. Sometimes I find 2 bars, and I try to spin them out, building stone after stone. A melody which seemed to be born in a second is almost always the result of painstaking work.
Aber komponiert hat er meistens im Freien.
Und sehr selten am Instrument.
Gespielt hat er eigentlich sehr selten, nur wenn er irgendein Musiker vorgespielt hat. Aber
ich erinnere mich nur, das war wunderbar, dass er seiner Frau, also unserer Großmutter, den Schluss Daphne, den sehr gerne gespielt hat. Da ist er am Klavier gewesen und dann abends hat also die Großmutter gemeint, komm, also Richard, setz dich doch hin, spiel mir ein bisschen was vor. Dann hat er also immer Daphne gespielt.
Der Schluss der Oper Daphne.
Also innerhalb der Familie gab es da schon, also auch, möchte ich sagen, stürmisch bewegte Stunden und Tage, wo also die Wellen auch im Haus schon hochgegangen sind und mal eine Türe zugefallen ist, dass der Mörtel so ein bisschen, oder der Putz von der Decke runtergefallen ist. Aber es war immer so ein bisschen der erhobene Zeigefinger und Griechisch lernen und mehr Klavier spielen und ich musste Flöte noch spielen und es war halt einfach er wollte uns nicht als Nachfolger für sich sehen, aber doch, sagen wir mal, er wollte dass das Werk von uns, von der Familie, Papa, natürlich Mama in erster Linie und dann von uns zwei, verwaltet, weitergeführt, erhalten.
Er wollte den humanistischen Geist in uns wecken. Das war also das ihm Wichtigste, die Tradition, der humanistische Geist, eine allumfassende Bildung. Das war eigentlich sein Wunschtraum.
Aber für mich war er nicht der große Richard Strauss. Das habe ich eigentlich erst die letzten 3, 4 Jahre kapiert, so ab 19, 20 oder wie ich Musik angefangen habe zu studieren, sondern dass er ein Großpapa war. Er hatte also wirklich, ich meine, auf die Frage von Humor zurückzukommen, Humor in dem Sinne nicht, aber er hatte immer Zeit für uns. Und wenn man ihn also ein bisschen geplagt hat, komm, geh spielen mit uns, dann ist er also auch in den Garten gegangen und hat mit uns sich also abgegeben und ist mit uns spazieren gegangen und hat immer Zeit gehabt.
Als Kind erinnere ich mich noch sehr gut, dass er mir also bei langen Spaziergängen hier im Garten alle Opern, ich war ja damals noch sehr klein, als Märchen erzählt hatte.
Und es hieß nicht bei uns, Ruhe, der Meister komponiert.
I compose everywhere, walking or driving, at mealtimes, at home or outside, in noisy hotels, in my garden, in trains. As cherry trees do not blossom in the winter, so musical ideas are not born when nature is bare and cold. I am a great friend of nature, and it is natural, therefore, that my best creative work is done in the springtime in the Bavarian Alps. I love the summer, the land and the mountains. Inspiration often comes when I am standing on the top of a mountain. I am never without my sketchbook, and the minute I discover a motif, I jot it down.
Strauss often conducted in Vienna. The capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was an elegant and sophisticated town. Its artistic center was the opera house and the coffee houses. In 1900, Strauss had met the poet Hugo von Hofmannsthal, who was the very model of Viennese aristocracy. Brought up in the world of literature, he lived withdrawn in a Rococo house at Rodown on the outskirts of the town. They were certainly an odd couple. The refined Hofmannsthal, melancholy, sophisticated, and the rash, often impatient Bavarian, but despite their different characters, their relationship was to last for 20 years. From the start, each felt a strong affinity for the other.
For my part, I am absolutely certain that we are destined to create together perhaps a number of works, which will be beautiful and remarkable.
Your nature is so complementary to mine. We were born for each other, and we will certainly accomplish something worthwhile if you remain faithful to me.
Strauss had seen Hofmannsthal's play Elektra. He recognized in it the material for an opera and immediately set to work.
I have a great desire to compose Elektra and have started to cut the text for this purpose.
3 years after the first draft, Hofmannsthal announced,
"Today, Strauss played and sang to me a large part of Elektra. It is very beautiful, and the text gains rather than loses."
Elektra is ready, and the finale is very juicy.
sich auf ein geblähten Holz und nach mir zingelt und das ich frei in meinem Hause laufen. Wenn sie mich mit ihren Blicken töten könnte.
Elektra, which was premiered in Dresden in 1909, never enjoyed the success of Salome, but it was soon performed in New York, Milan, and Strauss himself took the opera to London, where he conducted 2 performances. Beauchamp, who conducted the first night, recalled,
"One eminent British composer, on leaving the theatre, was asked what he thought of it. 'Words fail me,' he replied. 'I'm going home at once to play the chord of C major 20 times over, to satisfy myself that it still exists.'"
Elektra remains Strauss's most modern work. It took Strauss to the limit of harmony, but after Elektra, the road did not lead, as many expected, to atonality. Strauss said,
"Next time, I will write a Mozart opera."
Hofmannsthal set to work.
In 3 quiet afternoons, I have written a fresh scenario for an opera. It offers plenty of opportunities for lyrical passages and humour.
Strauss had asked Hofmannsthal for a Mozart opera, and he received one. For the first production, the set designer Alfred Roller devised these costumes and sets. The place and the language was courtly Vienna at the time of Maria Theresa. The Countess became the Marschallin, Cherubino changed into Octavian.
My dear Herr von Hofmannsthal, I am awaiting the next installments with impatience. The scene is charming, as easy to compose as oil or melted butter. You are Da Ponte and Scribe rolled into one. I am delighted, maybe a bit too delicate for the mob.
Your apprehension lest the libretto be too delicate does not make me nervous. A pompous, fat, and elderly suitor favored by the father has his nose put out of joint by a dashing young lover. Could anything be plainer? Even the least sophisticated audience cannot help finding the action simple and intelligible.
Strauss wrote letter after letter to spur his librettist on.
All figures are marvelous, drawn very sharply. Do not forget that the public should laugh. Laugh, not smile and grin. Maybe for the scene between the Baron and Sophie, you can invent something even better, more comical and more down-to-earth.
Dear Dr. Strauss, I do understand your demand for down-to-earth comedy. But I believe that a cheerful general atmosphere with animated, contrasting figures will always be superior. Think of Meistersingers or Figaro, which contain little to make one laugh, but much to smile at.